is a spark, it can ignite, and all you gotta do is bring the light. Cause a new light shine, cause a new light shine. Time to get on up, say tradition is mine. Cause a new
Hello, my
shine,
friends. Eliana Light here. Welcome to the Light Lab podcast. Great to be with you for another episode. This summer has been hot, at least here in Durham, North Carolina. It's continued to be a summer of challenges and of sorrows, and a summer of blossomings and hope. And I've been thinking a lot lately about how our Jewish practice, particularly tefillah, our prayer and liturgy practice, invites us and even asks us to hold two things as true at the same time, that the world is beautiful and a vibrant, incredible gift of love, and that there is so much that needs to change for this to be a world of justice and peace, and holding both of those things at once. Sharing that with you, maybe you're holding both of those too, but it's something that we need to hold all together. So that's where I'm at, listener, and perhaps you are there with me. I'm really excited to bring you today's interview, because today's interviewee is somebody who thinks very deeply about how we gather, about what makes a sacred text, about what religion and ritual can teach us, can give us outside of a traditional religious context. And that person is the inimitable, which I think is a word, Casper ter Kuile. Casper's work explores how we make meaning, deepen our relationships, and experience beauty in the 21st century. I love, first of all, his website might be my favorite personal website that I've ever seen. It is joyful and easy to read and sweet. So follow along at caspertk.com. We'll put a link in the show notes. Casper, in his own words, says, "At my best, I find ways to ennoble the everyday and create the conditions for joyful belonging. I believe in the transforming power of small groups, the vitality of commitment, and the liberating potential of good theology." Yes, good theology. I love that. "I delight in talking with soulful corporate leaders about ancient wisdom and with forward-thinking religious leaders about trends shaping our culture." So he is building those bridges. He's the author of The Power of Ritual, which is an incredible book, the co-founder of Sacred Design Lab, Nearness, a community, which we'll talk about, and the podcast Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. And his work has been featured in all sorts of different important periodicals. I first found out about Casper's work through his How We Gather studies, which really showed some trends in the larger culture about how people were gathering outside of the traditional religious space. They really made a splash when they came out. We'll link to them in the show notes. Co-authored with Angie Thurston. It's really an incredible guide. And we met at the last Knesset gathering pre-COVID. Rabbi Sid Schwartz, who was a former guest on the pod, we'll link to his episode. It was great to get to meet Casper and learn from him in person, and continue to stay connected and learn from him. So I invite you to listen to this with an open mind, no matter what your relationship to quote unquote organized religion might be. What is there that we can learn? So I hope that you enjoy my interview with Casper ter Kuile.
shine, shine, shine a new light. Shine, shine, keep it burning bright. Shine, 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 shine.
Hi, Casper. Welcome to the Light Lab.
Thanks for my first sentence. Thank you so much for having me. There we go. That's just because we're between friends.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Absolutely. I'm so grateful that we have this chance to catch up in this very modern way, where we're catching up, and also, between 100 and 250 people will also catch up, which is lovely.
It's like a giant conference, but it's just the two of us on stage. So I apologize to everyone who's not able to join the conversation.
You know, I would go to that conference. I mean, I guess I have
Right.
to because I would be there.
Yeah.
But
I mean, you're running it.
that is fair. Maybe the podcast is just an extension of how much I like conferences. But what if it was only panels with me and like one other person? I'm going to think about this. Because we did meet at a conference.
It's true.
The last gathering really that I went to before the world shut down.
Yes.
Which is wild to think about. But we're going to start, February of 2020. Wild. And we'll like get to there in the timeline. But as I like to do, we like to start way, 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 way back. Way, 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 way back. And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your relationship to prayer and liturgy when you were a kid. Did you have a relationship to those ideas? What did that mean for you?
Well, I grew up in England to Dutch parents. My parents were both born and raised in Holland, and we spoke Dutch at home. And they did not grow up religious. And so I didn't grow up religious either. So I come by my kind of non-religiosity, honestly. But I'm thinking as you're asking that question, I would say prayer was something that was honestly ridiculed. Like it was kind of just irrelevant in my life, and I thought it was a strange, like dumb thing that weird religious people did. We didn't really know religious people. It wasn't ridiculed is maybe too harsh a word, but certainly as I became a teenager and was aware that I was gay and religion said gay bad and therefore me say religion bad, like that. It was kind of man in the sky. I always think of your song from your album about the man in the sky. Like that was my level of understanding of religion, but just from the other side of things. So prayer was really absent. Liturgy, however, is more of an interesting question because so we obviously didn't go to church. Britain is a culturally Christian country, what you would say, but literally the head of the state is the head of the national church. So that's for sure. But like 6% of the population goes to church on a Sunday. It's a very, very different kind of cultural vibe than the US. But liturgically, there was a lot going on because I went to a Waldorf school, which is a Rudolf Steiner kind of school where there is a lot of nature, a lot of kind of alternative education. It's all about the holistic well-being of the child. And there's a lot that I actually deeply appreciate. So we danced around the maypole on May Day and we walked the spiral, into Christmas. We made Michaelmas lanterns and we, each kind of moment in time had a specific festival or ritual or celebration or song or food. And all of that was broadly based on the Christian calendar. So it obviously very much came from somewhere, but it didn't feel Christian. And that sounds that sounds silly, but because there was never any like explicit worship. It was just that like this whole community of parents and children and teachers co-created these amazing experiences. And so we're recording this in late spring, early summer, and I'm looking forward to celebrating Midsummer. And what Midsummer meant for us was there was a giant kind of performance on the big field where all the lower school processed in interesting costumes and kind of told a story through these amazing processions. Then there was, a lovely afternoon tea and people enjoyed themselves. Then there was a Shakespeare performance in the old kind of amphitheater as dark descended. And then finally, there was the Midsummer Fire, the St. John's Fire, where the graduating class processed in the dark, carrying these amazing kind of torches of flames and walking to this giant bonfire that was unlit and then saying together, fire, fire I bear, fire to burn the dead wood, fire, fire I bear, fire to light the dark night, from the many into one. And then they all stick their fire into this, unlit bonfire that explodes in flames. And then they sing there for like 2-3 hours. And then they're the last to leave by jumping over the fire. That's the kind of culmination of their graduation. So I say all of that to illustrate that like there was a lot of ritual. There was so much ritual in my childhood. And I didn't know the word liturgy, but when I look back at it now, there was so much there that wove people together and that wove the mystery into everyday life, and that is the art of liturgy. And so I've always been a bit of a, I was going to say a bit of a cross-dresser, but I think it's more a bit of a crosswalker between the kind of the secular and the
Yes.
spiritual, because those lines of distinction just weren't there so much for me as a child.
First of all, what an incredibly vivid image. Really intense, kind of heavy metal, the fire
It's
song.
so cool. Yeah.
And this is great because out of the maybe like 6, 7 things you mentioned, I maybe know one of those things. So I am very excited to like dig in and look at these things, the things that in other places are just cultural, quote unquote. Well, everybody
Right.
does these,
Right.
depends which culture you're from. It's so fascinating. At the time, did you have a sense of this is connecting me or something special is happening?
It's so hard to remember what
Yeah,
one thought when one was 8,
of
but I'll tell you
course.
some of the things I did.
Mhm.
There are photographs of me sitting, and I'm dressed in all white, and I'm wearing like a special little cap, and I've arranged all the flowers just so in front of me.
Lovely.
And my husband and I have this in common. We would both yearn to lay the table on special
Mm.
occasions. And so there was something about making things beautiful and making things special that I loved. And that was partly about, just the physical pleasure of something being lovely. But I think also because it elevated the experience of everyday life. It made me feel um just made the moments feel special. And that I was encouraged in that by my mom, especially, who was a very big community builder and
Mm.
organizer and gatherer of people. And so I definitely remember talking to my friends at that time, saying I could see people's auras, which I still don't know quite where I got that idea from. But there was this sense of like an
Nice.
otherness
Yeah.
being accessible by
Mm.
doing certain things or making certain things special. So I do remember that. And I look back at it now. I have one particular memory that was a little older. I was 15 at this point. I'd gone to boarding school as a 13-year-old, which was, I wanted to do it, but as a little queer kid in a house of 50 testosterone-fueled teenage boys, that
Ooh.
was maybe not the best setting for one's early adolescence. And so I asked my mother when I was 15, I was like, can I come live at home? And it meant driving an hour and a half to school and an hour and a half back every day. So it was a significant situation, but she, of course, said yes. And I got my own room when I was that age.
Mm.
And in that moment, my mother took me to see a friend of hers who did color therapy. What I'm saying is, Eliana, my village was full of interesting characters.
Yes.
And what this entailed was basically 2 different oils in the same little bottle, but they had different colors. And so there were all sorts of
Mm.
interesting combinations. And I remember standing as a 15-year-old in my own space, finally feeling safe. Like
Mm.
I had control over my environment, that I could be okay in the space, and that I put some of this gold oil on my hands, and that I traced the outline of my body without touching it, just like an inch away from my body, and that I was weeping. And it was just this moment of release. And I look back at it now, I'm like, oh, that was prayer. It was just this
Mm.
very physical embodiment of letting go, of surrendering to something bigger than me. And I didn't have any of that language yet, but it was it was a profound moment that I somehow, and no one told me to do that. It was just something
Wow.
that my body knew it wanted to do.
Yeah. And you had been involved or invited into these experiences of
Yeah.
um, collective awareness, collective marking of time, collective
Yeah.
noticing, that it makes a lot of sense that you would kind of intuitively be able to do that for yourself. And you're so right that the boundaries between the secular and the non-secular are often very blurred. But when we only see religion as like the people who sing to the dude in the sky,
Right.
then everything else does become separate. I'm
Right.
wondering if you had other experiences like that, kind of as you grew older, as you continued your education, or looking back, you might say, oh, that
Mm.
was a prayer experience that I had, that maybe you didn't see it like that at the time?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. My mind's thinking of one little analytical tool that I'll share, not because it's new to you, but just it might be interesting to someone who's listening,
Yeah.
just on where we draw that line between the secular and the sacred.
Mhm.
And usually we think about it as a vertical line, right? You separate this from that. And I think the way to think about it really is as a horizontal line, that
Mm.
everything has a kind of shallowness, but also everything has depth. And so it's about finding, the sacred is about finding that depth wherever you are, whatever you love. And so when I think back at like, well, what were other memories of that kind of that could be seen as prayer? And for me, it was often in singing.
Mhm.
So I went to a summer camp, which was just 10 days long, so very different from a kind of American camp. But we were camping in tents and, pooping in a hole in the woods. Like it was cooking on an open fire. It was like real camping. And again, that was separated boys and girls. And so often for the first 7 days, I would hate it. I wasn't good at football. I didn't like the triathlon,
Mhm.
But then the last 3 days, everyone had gotten past their kind of posing and everything else. And it just became this amazing experience of connection. And we sang. Every event had a song. Every moment of the day had a song. And so I remember, just opening every day, we kind of raised a little flag on a flagpole, and there was the morning song, and the evening the flag came down, and a little lamp went up.
Mm.
And so those moments were just opening time, closing time. There were songs of that I knew my parents had sung when they were in the camp. My grandmother had sung. So just like this sense of stitching meaning into time was something that was done through song.
That's so beautiful. I was going to ask what encourages or what inspires someone who grew up secular to go to divinity school, but I think you've answered that. I
Well,
think you've
yes,
answered that. Yes,
yes and
and
no.
okay.
Yes and no, because all of that in my mind, everything I've just described to you was not religion. And so
Right.
I didn't even think of it really, Eliana, as a spiritual. Like it was just the weird stuff that my family did,
Yeah.
because I realized quickly once I left home that this was not normal.
Right.
Um, but I'll tell you what the instigating factor was, that I became an activist and especially worked on climate change. And if whenever you're confronting something of enormity, whether it's a death of a loved one or a diagnosis or the disaster of climate change, you're confronted with your own insignificance.
Hmm.
And that was my experience. I was trying to get young people to put pressure on politicians around the UN climate negotiations. And after a few years, I was just like, A, the impact we're having is so little, but B, I can't think it's my fault that climate change is happening and that it's my responsibility to fix it. Because as a 21-year-old, not only did I think it was my responsibility, but I thought I could do it.
Right. Of course.
White privileged man. And so there was a humbling that happened.
Hmm.
And I noticed that the leaders in justice movement work who were able to stick at it for decades always had something spiritual going on. They were a
Hmm.
Quaker, or they had a prayer practice, or they, were Buddhist or whatever. Like there was something. And that to me was interesting. And so when I ended up going to graduate school, originally just to study public policy, which I thought would be a good,
Yeah.
next thing after being an activist, I just kept meeting so many more interesting people across campus at the Divinity School, because in policy school, you ask questions like, well, how do we reduce recidivism, right? Like the number of people returning from prison who offend again. But in Divinity School, you ask questions like, why do we have prisons? And that's
Ooh.
just so much more interesting
Yeah.
to me. Both are necessary, but and so I wrote to them and I was like, hi, I'm like a gay atheist. Can I go here? Is this just for Catholic priests? And they were like, oh no, you're in exactly the right place. And
Mhm.
so I really fell in love with not just the study of religion, but the practice of religion and being around religious people who I honestly always find other people who are living life in the way that I want to live my life. And so
Hmm.
that's what's drawn me to practices like prayer, is that I can see that it changes who people are when they pray.
Yeah, that it changes who people are. I love that. I didn't know that story. I don't think about coming at it from an activist place, but as someone who experiences a lot of climate grief, it's so real. Both this idea that I think many religious traditions ask us to hold at once, where what I do matters and my life is valuable and makes a big difference in the world, and it's not just about me, and it can't just be about me and what I do. In your experience in div school, like I'm thinking about that kind of bridge, kind of getting over that. The people, everyone who's religious thinks there's like a man in the sky granting wishes, to a more nuanced and I would say realistic understanding of religion. I'm wondering, what that bridge was like.
It was wonderful teachers. You know,
Mm.
I remember just feeling like I had discovered a box that no one had told me about. And inside the box were like all the things that were for me, but I just didn't know it existed.
Yeah.
Oh, funny. I feel emotional just saying that.
Mm.
But I'm thinking of especially Stephanie Purcell and Kerry Maloney, who two figures who, in the Divinity School, I was just like, oh, I want to know the things that you know. And Stephanie teaches and taught a lot about reading and writing as sacred practices. And so no surprise, Harry Potter and the Sacred Text as a podcast really came out of her teaching. And two of her students, myself and Vanessa Zoltan, who kind of explored that in new directions and new ways. And Kerry was instrumental in inviting me into prayer. She said, you know, you can pray. You don't have to know exactly what it is that you're praying to, or even if you want that, but like prayer is for you. And so I continually felt from not all the faculty, but the important ones to me, this incredible sense of generosity of like, you don't have to be part of what is real for me in order to participate in the riches of what I have received. And that has also been my experience of working with and next to the Jewish community. Like, I have loved being like the goy who knows what like Pardes is. And like and being like welcomed into both in social circles, obviously things like Shabbat and Passover and, you know, all of the domestically celebrated Jewish traditions, but also into like real like study of text and conversation about, well, who gets to decide what's Jewish and what isn't, and that hospitality and generosity that I experienced both in Divinity School and then later. I wish everyone knew that was there, because it's been profoundly meaningful.
That's so powerful. That idea of a box, maybe even a treasure that you didn't know was there. I use that metaphor all the time for Jewish practice, both as in there's a treasure buried in our own backyard that we don't often know about, and also that sometimes the passing on of religious tradition can feel like handing down a box, but we tell the next generation, your job is to hold this box so you can pass it on to the next people, but like, don't open the box.
Don't look inside.
We don't actually really care. We're actually kind of embarrassed about what's in there. And we haven't shown you through our lives that it means anything. Like, the important thing is to pass on the box. And then they're like, well, I'm not just going to stand here with this box. So like, what does it mean to actually have something that's worth passing down? Not just to say that the thing is to pass it, because I think perhaps coming from a different angle, able to look and study really all of these religions, having not grown up in them, perhaps maybe, and you can tell me what you think, makes you more attuned to the treasures than maybe somebody who grew up with it either in a this is what you must do way, or we're not like those people sort of way. I don't know.
I mean, there's certainly a pattern that was true in my life and is true in many, many other, you know, certainly people in our generation that I've seen, which is that if you grow up within something or close to something, for me, that was just the cultural Christian background of the empire nations of my childhood. The first foray into a spiritual practice or a retreat or like something that kind of is about that religion thing usually is a different tradition. So, right, for me, that was a very simple kind of Buddhist meditation practice that felt like a safe, secular way of sitting quietly. And over the years, that sitting practice became more of a prayer practice, but it started there, and the same was true for me with ritual, of like really participating in Jewish ritual and then being like, oh, like this is kind of cool. What do I have, and what do I have authority to play with? Because I that's the part that's been really fun for me more recently, as being like, okay, like what would this Christian tradition look like if I did it my way? And that's not something I would feel comfortable doing with traditions that are beyond Christianity. Even though I'm like not officially Christian, I'm not baptized. I'm like, yeah, but I have legitimacy to play with this.
Right.
But I think that pattern of going somewhere elsewhere in order to feel comfortable, then to look at your own tradition through a new lens of appreciation. Often you have to leave to come back.
Yeah, and often you need to have teachers and texts and places and gatherings that help you feel welcomed to come back. You're right. I think there's so many treasures. It's not for nothing that one of the reasons religion is also hard is because of all of the terrible things that it has done in the world and for the world. And I wrestle with that all the time to think, yes, I believe that this can make people better people, but it's also caused so much heartache and violence. Maybe that's just particularly on my heart right now. I don't know how to turn this into a question other than like, Casper, how do we fix this? But that's not what I mean it to be. I'm just thinking out loud.
It's so real. Yeah, that image I often use is that religion is like fire, and it can, light your candle and warm your home, but it can also burn your house down. And but we need it, like it's not like, so I think it's so much about, well, how do we both build the systems and structures of accountability and training and all of those things, but also I'm struggling how to say this without regretting it, but just like suffering is also inevitable, and that will also just be true in religion. Like it's I think thinking about religion as something that's pure is itself really unhelpful. Partly this comes up a lot in questions around money in religion, and like, oh, you can't charge for something, or like, oh, there's this perceived like a sullying of something that's spiritual with money. And I'm like, these two things have always been connected. It's not like there's some space that's beyond the everydayness of life. And I think that's true with, failed leadership and abuse and violence and everything else. It's everywhere. But we should hold people to a higher standard. That is for sure.
Yeah,
and ourselves.
But you're right. And that's an interesting way to think about it, in that religion is created by people.
Right.
So it's going to be as messy as we are. And to say that there is like a pure form of this, but it's been, sullied by one group or another. Yeah, that's very fair. What inspired you then to look at the ways that our society kind of does religion without religion, one might say?
It was a very selfish question. And this was an inquiry that on my very first day of school, I was in a seminar for Introduction to Ministry Studies, and I was with a group of maybe 12, 14 other students, and one of them was Angie Thurston, who's been my dear friend and collaborator over many years now. And we started the seminar by sharing our spiritual autobiography. So sharing a little bit, in the same way I've done today, about bringing and what that looked like. And she tells the story that she heard my spiritual autobiography, and she wanted to kind of like pounce on me. She was like, I need to work with. I only realized that later, that I wanted to work with her, which was also,
perfect.
Also great. But we were very self-motivated, because we were like, we are unaffiliated millennials.
Mhm.
Where are people like us going to find community, meaning, purpose, connection to something larger than themselves? And so we were really interested because we wanted places like that for ourselves and had tried to make them and had, tried other things and it wasn't quite. And we wrote a little paper called How We Gather that we thought would be hopefully appreciated and read by the very people we were describing. So these kind of like non-religious communities that seem to be doing religious things, people looking after each other's dogs when they're going on holiday, or, celebrating weddings and funerals in a gym, or, cultivating personal development and whatever else was going on. But the people who really responded to this paper were religious institutions.
Yeah.
And on reflection, it makes sense because they were asking questions like, well, where are all the young people? And here was a document saying, they are going here. Not that it was a perfect illustration or analysis, but it came at the question not from an angle of deficit, of where have they gone, but it came at the question from what are people doing? Like, where are they going? And I think that gave a different way to tell the story of not religious decline, but religious transformation. That people are still doing religious things and behaving in religiously interesting ways. It's just where they're doing it and how they're doing it is different than what you would recognize, if you're coming at it from a traditional synagogue perspective.
Right. I'm wondering, in what you've seen from really the embrace of religious institutions into the How We Gather studies, which is certainly how I learned about you and your work for the first time. It was, everybody was, have you read this? Have you read this? It's totally, that's where everybody's going. Like, are there lessons that you think religious institutions learn that you're like, I don't know if that was the lesson? And like, what are the lessons that you would like them to learn actually from that research?
There was a Methodist bishop who was like, okay, so we should make a Methodist soul cycle. And it was like, no, that's not the vibe. The thing that maybe sticks with me the most is, and I remember one group in Michigan really used this actively, but we identified these kind of 6 principles that were often being enacted in very different programmatic ways, right? So from like yoga to art classes to nature walks to like what was happening was very different, but what they were about was pretty consistent. And so we labeled these 6 themes as, let's see if I can remember here from a decade later, but it was purpose finding, creativity, social transformation, personal transformation, accountability, and community. And that's what we saw people looking for and being expressed in these programs. So one of the most famous case studies was CrossFit, which had a very strong culture of accountability. And I think in church circles, and maybe this is true in the Jewish community too, there's sometimes a real hesitation in more progressive spheres about building in structures of accountability because of what you had described, the kind of negative impact of religious authority, especially on people at the margins, gay people, women, folks of color, very real. And so a real sensitivity to making demands essentially of people or holding people to certain. And yet how this was being expressed in CrossFit was not that everyone has to be able to do 50 burpees, but the way they framed it was, you get to say how many you're going to do, and then we're going to hold you to what you've said you're going to do. And that holding you to it is an expression of our care and belief in you that you are capable of it. And that was just such a different way of thinking about accountability, for example. So for me, what's been exciting is religious institutions that have tried, and it's very hard to do, I'm not saying it's easy, but have tried to listen beneath the words that people say and look for what are the kind of soul needs of people outside of religious institutions, and what are some creative ways in which we might meet those that don't require someone else to do it our way in order to belong to this tradition, this community, this land of God.
Yeah, I think something amazing really that you were kind of saying to the religious world is like, you already have the tools.
Absolutely.
Like, everybody's looking for what you're offering. It's actually kind of baked into our DNA as humanity. Just gotta maybe,
And
Well,
that can be threatening, right? I
yeah.
mean, so I had two projects that really came out of divinity school. One was this How We Gather paper, and the other was this podcast, the Harry Potter and the Sacred Text podcast. And that was such a great example of, my co-host Vanessa grew up as an atheistic Jew in LA, and here was me in a kind of culturally Christian British context.
Mhm.
And so we drew on Jewish and Christian reading practices, but we weren't doing it with the Bible. We were doing it with Harry Potter. But I cannot tell you how many emails we have received at this point. We launched that show, 8 years ago. So people
Wow.
have been listening for nearly a decade. And the number of people who now love thinking about like a Chavruta question with their friend, who would
Mhm.
never have gone to seek out like Torah
Yeah.
text study, or people who have adapted Lexio Divina for their classroom and now know how to like help people read, not just for information or for entertainment, but for meaning making. Like those are the gifts of tradition. And so I think the crucial question for spiritual innovators is always, when we look inside the treasure box, what is the treasure that works in this moment,
Mhm.
and what do we need to let go of to let that treasure shine in this cultural historical context? And I was very inspired by Carol Zinn, who is the current executive director of the kind of umbrella organization for most of America's nuns, so the Catholic nuns. And she said that it is always the religious life. So being a sister, being a nun, is always a radical response to the gospel in a specific historical and cultural context. So like there is this call of tradition, but it's always going to be like the way you live that out is always going to be contextual. And that gives me some confidence to try, not always to get it right, but to try and innovate with that tradition. Because if you try and make something up, I had classmates who were, humanists or whatever, and they would try and make a calendar where February is the month of love, March is the month of compassion, April is the month of joy. And it's like, it's so meaningless and dull, because it has no context. It has no
Right.
that there is no treasure box that you're working with. You're trying to like make treasure by dancing around. And I may be being a little harsh here, but that's the benefit of a religious tradition, is that you get something to work with and against. Sometimes that's just as fruitful to be like, well, we're going to do Kol Nidre this way.
Right. But you're still responding
Exactly.
to the religion as a treasure box or as the clay through which you create. It reminds me of when I interviewed Billy Jonas for the podcast, and he was talking. He said, he at a certain point he wanted to make his own calendar, and he's like, well, in the winter it's dark, so we'll have a ritual around light, and I guess that's Hanukkah. And
Yeah.
then spring and rebirth and liberation. I guess that's Passover.
That's Passover.
Right? And he like looked, and every single one was like, I guess my ancestors already did this. I just never
Learning
thought
cheesecake. Yeah.
Right. That's coming up. I just, never realized that my ancestors were like Judaism is an earth-based religion also, because not maybe I can't say all religions, but there's a reason that many religious traditions have holidays of light in the winter.
Yeah.
Like it's almost as if that's what we need, are reasons to get together and light candles and feel good about things when it's dark and cold.
Yeah.
This is an interesting way to think about your book also, the power of ritual, in terms of being like, have you heard about these treasure boxes? And kind of ordering them in a way where we get to see that idea, not just hear the different treasures, but hear ways that they might be fruitful for you in your life. And I would love for you to share a little bit around the prayer piece in particular, what you think those treasures are and how people might find them meaningful.
Yeah, so the book was structured around these 4 different kind of connections with self, with one another, with the natural world, and with transcendence. And that final part, my language, I would now use God, but that's not a word that always translates well. But that connection to God, or that connection with that which transcends us and is within us and between us, moving us, and moving through our being. I think for a lot of people, there's a sense that that only comes if you're sitting on a cushion on, still water in some tropical destination or something that's, very far away from everyday life. And so I really wanted to encourage readers to think about what are the bridges that you can walk across in any moment to that different heart space or that memory of what is true and beautiful and good. And so if that is listening to a particular, as is the case for me, sad Kathleen Edwards song on repeat for hours, that's good. If that's laughing, like it's about the quality of your intention, your capacity to sustain attention, and then your repetition of this practice over time. It's not that any particular way of praying is better than the other one, right? It might be meditatively journaling or beauty, really sustaining your attention through painting or like snuggling your dog. Like I really wanted to try and give permission for people to name and embrace the sacred moments that already exist in their life and to then treat them seriously and say, well, if snuggling my dog is how I experience the divine, like I better take that seriously. I better like really know how to do it well, right? And make it a discipline. And so, for me, music is really the place. I'm such a heady person sometimes, so I like getting beyond words. And so singing in harmony with others is often the only time I really stop thinking and just am being. And so those kind of practices or practices that help people walk across that bridge from the outcome oriented, whatever our dominant culture tells us we have to do and be, to a place where we know that we are inherently worthy and good and belong and feel a source of generosity and forgiveness and hope that, comes from within and beyond us. Like anything that does that is prayer.
Yeah, I loved the idea of prayer as sustained attention, sustained and loving attention. And I think it helped me see kind of, often we'll say, oh, I didn't like those services or those services weren't great. But then like, what do we actually mean by that? I think part of it is when people feel like, oh, we're singing the words, we're singing the liturgy, but it doesn't seem like we're all here. It doesn't seem like we're all in it. And how it can often be challenging to bring that sustained attention to a more institutional prayer space. And
Eliana, I'm really curious what you think here, because I find myself so conflicted. One of the things you'll often hear in congregations with a creed, for example, right, where we're reciting in a Christian church context, something like the Nicene Creed, or in a Jewish context, right, there might be a long piece of singing where, a lot of people don't believe.
Yeah.
And one of the things that will be said is like, well, I don't believe it today, but someone else in this community does. And so an expression of faith doesn't have to be my own, but like together, it counts. It adds up to something. And on some days, I really believe that. I'm like, that is beautiful. That's why we do it together. That's why, we need to pray as a community. And I think that the minyan concept is just one of the best gifts in the Jewish tradition. But then on other moments, I'm like, but why are we saying things that we don't believe? Like, why are we stuck with these words? Like, we can change them. Like, let's be real. Let's say what's honestly, like, let's have the courage of our convictions and not hide behind traditions that are going to become conventions. And for many people have. And then there's no sauce in it. You're just eating dry pasta.
Right.
So, like, how do we hold those two things?
Turning the tables on me. Seriously. No, I appreciate it. I think about this a lot. I mean, the first piece of Jewish text that came to mind was Yigdal, which is a poetization of Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith. we don't do that a lot in Judaism. And there were a lot of people who were mad at Maimonides. Like, you can't just distill Judaism to these 13 ideas, but it's traditionally sung at the end of Friday night services. And it has a lot of jaunty tunes. And when I used to run a minyan that led Yigdal, I would usually say, and now let's end by singing a bunch of stuff we don't believe. Because, like, at least somebody should say it, first of all. But because, like, that's just acknowledging it, that I'll say from a Jewish perspective, in the liberal circles that I work in, we have very different theology than our ancestors did, who wrote the prayers or who prayed the prayers. I try to remind myself and others that all liturgy started as prayer, that a person prayed this. Often in the Siddur, in the Jewish prayer book, it's remixes of lines from Tanakh, from the Bible. But it's also like a series of choices that people made. Somebody said or wrote this in response to being a human being in the world. And we are also responding to as being human beings in the world, but we don't have to parrot their words as if they're our words. That we can have empathy for our ancestors and I wonder who they were that they responded to the world in that way. Looking at the liturgy as poetry and having teachers like Rabbi Reuven Kimmelman, who have studied like the poetics of prayer, remind me that poetry isn't meant to be taken literally. It's meant to get at something under the literal, that kind of horizontal line that you were talking about, and to give us permission, not even just to say that we don't have to totally believe what we're saying, but that's not necessarily the point of all this. At least I don't think it is. Like the Unetaneh Toka, for example, in the High Holidays, it's the one with like who by fire, who by water, who shall live and who shall die. And I really don't like that when I think of I'm saying this because this is what's literally happening today. But I love it when I think about it as one person wrestling with what it means to be a human being. And now I have this clay, these art supplies, like this material that now I get to wrestle with and through. And that the prayer part is the heart part. And you can say all the words and not be praying. And you can say none of the words and be praying. But there is something to having the shared language and that which connects us ancestrally and communally, so we're not each doing it on our own. That was a lot of
no, I love that so much, because your where you're landing is also, and I'll speak for Angie relatively confidently that we agree on this, is that in mapping all of these new communities, these secular communities doing religious things, the thing they lacked, amongst a few others, but one of the things they really lacked was a shared language. And so people were having experiences which were individually meaningful or even collectively meaningful, but they couldn't communicate about it. Like the depth of what was going on was beyond the words that they had to describe it. And what happens, as I understand it, in our brains when we don't have language to describe experience, we either we find words for it, or we suppress the meaningfulness of the experience itself, because we literally cannot make sense of it. And so that's one of the sadnesses for me of like, yes, again, and I'll speak in a Christian context here, but like, oh my God, I'm like, the cross, really? Like, we need to watch a torturing event? Like, that's the centerpiece of it? Like, there's so much, I'm like, this is the core, and I get yes, it's about sacrifice, it's about all the things, but like, if we completely let go of this language that has, through horrible expansionist colonialism, but like, this is one of the languages of the world. It is, and certainly a language across time, and to lose it completely, and I can't quote the Bible, but people who've grown up with that as a resource, I am so jealous of them, because it is, that text is not it's not a prescription for the world, it's a description of it in my mind. And so when we have that shared resource of language, like, suddenly you can communicate at a different level. And right now, all we have is like TV shows.
Right. But even within the religious context, it's the same thing about not knowing that the treasure box is there.
Yeah.
Like, we don't always know we have the language to communicate because the word God comes to mean a particular set of things. And we
Yes.
have all of this God baggage, like I think back to when I was a kid. Did I know that when I was talking about God in prayer, I was also talking about the feeling I got when I was hugging a tree or singing karaoke with my friends? Like, I
Yes.
don't know if I made that
Right.
connection.
No, because people are bad at teaching tradition. I love
Yeah.
that I held a
It's
funeral
true.
for a tree when I was 6, and I was like,
Oh.
I just know I have to do this.
Yeah. Like, there's something there. There's
Yes.
something there. There's often something there, and often something there in kids. Like, kids
Big
get
time.
it. They understand that there's something bigger going on. I often say, like, there's a reason we call it childlike wonder and not teenage-like wonder. Like, it's
Ooh.
like developmentally, it makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
And then I think
Yeah.
part of what I think our tradition can help us do, and maybe many religious traditions fall into that, is to hold on to that as we age, to
Yeah.
say it doesn't actually have to fall away. But the challenging thing is like making that connection between these deep needs that people have as a human, and we have all of these amazing tools and language and tradition, but it's just not connecting.
Do you know, I honestly wonder, I sometimes think that religious institutions don't remember what religion is for.
Whew.
And
Yeah.
it's built in inherently a conflict between, institutional maintenance and power building. And like, I absolutely understand. And I understand the need of that too. But like, the Vatican has $93 billion in assets.
Ooh.
And that is just insane. Like, it is morally wrong.
Yeah.
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 It's an affront to God, and so like, but I understand if you're using a rationale of the the world that we live in, that gets you there. But if you are using a rationale of God, like, it should be the very opposite, right? And so it's an impossible situation that we put religious leaders into. But you can't teach a new generation the treasure box, as you said, if all you're looking at is the box.
Mhm.
Like, you there has to be a deep a deep vulnerability of
Right.
being like, whoa, here's a thought. What if
Yeah.
we stop passing about the box and we just hand over the treasures, even if it means some of the treasures get lost?
Yeah.
Bold thought. Not sure if I agree with my thought, but it's a thought.
It is. Like, if we believe that this matters,
Right.
I think about this with prayer education a lot, because so many teachers end up getting to a place, which is understandable, where we end up trying to convince, let's
Yes.
say, we try to convince the 7th graders that prayer is important, even though the messages that they're getting from everywhere else in their lives is saying that it's not important.
Yeah.
But it's like, how about instead of convincing them it's important, we do the important part of it,
Yes. Yeah.
because we think it matters, not because we're trying to convince them to make prayer a part of their lives. Just do it. Do the part
Yeah.
of it that's important. And if they end up getting the idea that it matters, that's great. But then they're also getting the actual thing that the prayer hypothetically does. But we often miss that point. We focus so much on the form, instead of the why, the thing that is like underneath the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is religion for? Gosh, I was thinking also, when you were talking about asking stuff of people, how hard that is, this idea of commandedness of mitzvah, and growing up thinking that a mitzvah is a good deed because we've lost the language of commandment. I've started translating mitzvah as commitment instead of commandment.
Ooh, nice.
I'm still like playing around with how that feels, if that feels like targeted
like
enough,
that.
but it's working for now for me.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, if we don't make commitments, you get pulled along by the commitments of other people, right?
Mhm.
Of the market, of the fame game, of all the things that, institutions benefit from our lack of attention and commitment. I think one of the purposes of religion is to form us, is to be, for religious communities to be communities of formation that help us become something different than what the rest of the world wants us to be. Not to like isolate or separate us, but like to help us be more forgiving, to help us be more courageous, to help us be more just, like that. And that demands things of us. And that's one of the things that I still struggle with in my own life, because I look for communities where I'm like, do I trust this community to form me to become the kind of person that I want to be? And then I'm like, no. But if I have that high standard for everything, no, I end up as I am now. Like, I don't belong to a congregation. And I've kind of secretly built my own just by hosting a regular singing night, and through song gathering a community that loves each other and supports each other and does good things. But it's not, it's not a full I would never call that a spiritual community. But so I still, what I'm trying to say here is that I still long for an expression of religious tradition that I feel safe enough to surrender to.
Yeah. That's the challenge, is, if I only went somewhere that reflected everything that I think about Judaism in the world, it would just be me.
Yeah.
And also what a loss it would be if I was at a place where I had to sublimate my full and true self to be part of it. That's the challenge. I'm wondering if there's a line there between kind of your earlier work and the nearness, experimenting with what does it mean to do this stuff together and in community, even across distance.
Yeah, so nearness has been a really interesting project over the last 2-3 years of building small groups of people who don't necessarily share a practice or a religious commitment or a geographic location, because they're all online. And instead commit to a covenanted relationship in which they explore life's biggest questions. And it was a really beautiful experiment. The project is taking a little bit of a different shape in this next chapter. But over the last 2-3 years, what's been really beautiful was seeing how strangers could, within 90 minutes of their first conversation, have the kind of depth of, I want to say, like, intimate conversation that they were like, I don't get to have this, even with some of the closest people in my life, because of the intentionality of the liturgy. And it really was a liturgy. It was a 5-step process in which we started with, helping people arrive and settle in through a very simple body breathing exercise. Then kind of setting the container, making the promises in the covenant section of, this is how we're going to be together, right? Reading that aloud. Then having a moment of deep reflection. So usually we would journal in some way or some sort of interior moment of reflection. And then there would be a sharing portion. The 4th section would be listening and sharing, small groups of 5-6 people. And then closing in the 5th section with a closing blessing. And so that same shape was true in every single 90-minute nearness gathering, even if the content was different. And even as a program designer, it was just such a reminder of the value of liturgy, because having the structure, whether you're officiating a wedding or creating, a reflection circle like this, with that DNA underneath, then you can express it in all sorts of different ways. So it made me want to learn more about the worshiping arts. So I was like, there's more to learn.
There's more to it. I wonder sometimes, like, as challenging as it is to wrestle with the liturgy, imagine if I had to start from scratch every time.
Oh heavens. Yeah. No, thank you.
Right. That would be way too much for one person to take on. What does prayer and liturgy look like in your life, both kind of your work life, if there are any projects you're working on, and your life as a spiritual being?
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I no longer have a daily practice in the way that I did for many years, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I still struggle with that a little bit, because I think I'm sure it would be good for my mental health, if nothing else. Yeah, right.
Same.
But like, I am so conscious of moments now that I was not before. And trying to think of one that was. It's just I was running late from this doctor's appointment to get here, and then the heavens opened and rain. Just like I have not seen that much rain in New York City since I moved here 5 years ago, and I just had a moment of like, how delightful! Like
Yes.
just feeling this warm water like all over my body, and I couldn't really see, and it was, I was just like, oh, I'm alive. And so it was like I feel like my muscles have been strengthened in feeling the prayerfulness of moments. And there's certainly still things that I do, that help me, I hope, cultivate that. But I feel the flow of prayer now rather than the like trying to squeeze prayer. So that's maybe on one level. And then on a professional level, I'm trying to write a book about covenant, and it is such an interesting realization that, like being in a covenanted relationship, the discipline is really about telling the truth, and constantly returning to each other after breaks of perfection, right? Because like no one's perfect, so it's constantly breaking and repairing, and that prayer is really a I don't want to say greasing the wheels of relationship, but like if we don't have practices that help us cross that bridge, then it's very hard to do that relationally. And so I'm excited to hopefully give prayer another shout out in a different context.
Oh, that's great. I love that idea too, that perhaps opening our hearts to possibility in prayer can, I love that language and use it a lot, exercise that muscle so that we can more generously and more often do that for each other.
That's definitely my experience, because people are annoying.
Yeah, they don't always do the thing that you wish they would do. Isn't that a shame?
In the way I wanted it done.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
You mean they can't read my mind? Oh yeah. These are all really good reminders. If someone was thinking of starting a prayer practice, whether it's daily or not, and felt overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that was out there, is there something you might recommend?
I always invite people to go ritual spotting in their own lives. And so what I would advise you to do is to notice what you love. What do you genuinely, uncomplicatedly just love? And to turn that into some structured practice. So if it is watercoloring, if it is singing, if it is, walking in nature, like cultivate a quality of attention while you're doing it, and try to sustain that attention long enough to really feel what you're doing, and to let the love kind of like a battery just like fill you up from your feet all the way to the top of your head, and to take that loving intention seriously, because I think then you'll understand the taste of prayer, and be able to formalize it and share it and do all the other things that we know are necessary. But it has to start with a deep-seated fullness of life and love.
Beautiful. Before I ask you the last thing, is there anything that you didn't get to talk about that you would like to talk about?
Oh my gosh, no, this was great. It was great.
Great.
Thank you.
So I've started ending interviews with the same question, which is, before we go, can you leave us with a blessing?
Well, these are the words of John O'Donoghue, but I use them very liberally. And so my blessing for you, Eliana, and everyone listening is, may all that is unlived in you blossom into a future graced with love.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, friend. What a delight to podcast and converse with you. Thank you so
Right
much.
back at you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thank you so much for listening. before we go, I want to share a little bit about our schedule over the next couple of months. Like a lot of people in podcasts, we are slowing down for the summer. Up next in a couple of weeks will be the end of our Shabbat at Home series. And then we'll be taking a little break as we work on some exciting new ways to bring the podcast to you. We, our scrappy little podcast, as I like to say, is already a few years old, and we're thinking about how to make it sustainable, how to reach a wide audience, and also, more importantly, have reach a depth of audience to make an impact. If you have ideas on fundraising or grants or sustainability, or if you would buy a t-shirt or a tote bag that says the achadity of it all on it, please let me know. I also want to take this opportunity to say a great big thank you to Rachel Kaplan, who has been our wisdom weaver and podcast producer for the past many, many months, and has been really integral to putting out the episodes, and has done so with love and with light. And it's been such a pleasure working with you, Rachel. I know you're listening to this as you're editing this. Rachel is staying on for these last 2 episodes, and we thank her so, so much for all of the amazing work that she has done on this podcast, and will continue to do out in the world. Thank you so much to Yafa, as always, for our amazing show notes. Check them out. They are a learning tool that we hope that you will continue to use. Stay in touch with us on social media, and we'll see you again next month for our episode on Hamotzi. Take care, y'all.